Hello and welcome to another episode of Health, Wealth, Mindset. And today we're going to be talking about something that I think has been absolutely brilliant. It's about in the zone, in the flow and in the groove. And you know, we recognise on the Paralympics what a fantastic effort they made, because I'm just looking at the record that they got, and it was better than the Tokyo Olympics. And we won. How many medals did we win? Now, it was quite a few. We won over 100 medals. 124 medals equals Tokyo, but more goals in Paris this time. Right, we got 49 goals, which is absolutely amazing. And I've got an idea of how much hard work they put into that to achieve that, because I loved sport when I was in the military. I worked in the gym. I had a great time. And today we're talking about both in the zone in sport, but I've got an expert with me today who's going to be talking about flow in business. And you know, having run a business now for almost 40 years, I've got a pretty good idea about running businesses and being successful and also being unsuccessful, which I did quite well at times. So I've got with me Niall Ogilvy, who is an absolute legend, and he did stuff in the military in early days, brought the military, the army, up to date with computers, which is a whole other story. And we did a podcast that was released yesterday, so listen into that. Hello, Niall.
Hi, Joe. How are you doing?
Absolutely fantastic, and great to have you here today with me. Yeah. So, yeah, I want to talk about, you know, because I know a great deal about being in the zone, and on the podcast, you refer to the fact that you did quite a bit of sports, but you were never in the zone a lot. Whereas I was in the zone, running marathons and PTI gymnastics and all that sort of stuff. So, from what you know about business, can you just give your take on flow, being in the flow?
I think it's absolutely parallel and really the same thing that athletes talk about when they're in the zone. It's all about focus and applying skills when you're facing a challenge. Now, in business, it might not, probably in most cases, it won't be as acute as that, but there are occasions when you really need to knuckle down and get something done, delivered, achieved, whatever it is in the business world. So flow is one of the recognized psychological states of mind, and there are 8 of them. I won't go through them all, but it includes things like anxiety, relaxation, and boredom and apathy. So those are the sort of things that flow sits alongside, because obviously when we're feeling differently, our mind is capable of different things or not, as the case may be. The real business parallel, I think, is with processes. Every business thrives on processes to deliver outcomes and outputs that are necessary to for functions to operate across, no matter what the business. And people go to great lengths to document them and train people and so on. But it's only a good process that will flow. A bad process is disjointed, it bumps and grinds, and so on. And there's an expert in this field called Professor John Seddon, who created a whole method called systems thinking. And one of his examples is rather good. One of his lectures, he went into a council in the south of England, and he looked at their housing repair process, which was very convoluted. It was all about approvals and administration and bureaucracy and all that kind of stuff. So the first thing that happened is that the appointment was made, that the householder wasn't told, the engineer would turn up. Oh, they're not in. I'll cancel that one off the list. And it just went on in this vein. They had to get, once they assessed the job, they went into indent for parts and blah, blah, blah. And he just took it by its heels and shook it, completely reinvented it end to end, and made it very, very householder focused, made it much easier for the plumber or whoever the chap was going to do the repair, and made a complete difference, to the extent that, this is the bit I love, that when the assessors and quality people came from London to check out this council, they were ripping their hair out, because you've got this thing's been sitting for three and a half weeks. Yes, but the householder's on holiday. They don't want us till this date. It's in our diary. They'll get the visit when they're going to be in on this agreed date that suits the householder. Well, you could just imagine the scenario. It's classic. So he's well worth a listen to if you want to find him on YouTube, Professor John Seddon.
And isn't that interesting? Because I mean, I was talking. I was talking with someone the other day. And we were talking about academics and common sense isn't common practice, as you know. And I've spoken and had experience with academics who have common sense and academics who have no common sense. I've also spoken to non-academics who have common sense and non-academics who have no common sense. And I think the prevailing factor is I'd rather deal with someone who's got common sense. In whatever guise, and what I think you touched on there was that the academics or the hierarchy was saying, look, we don't want to wait 3 weeks, and yet they don't understand what they want, and what's right for the customer might not be the same. And what you get when you are in the flow together and it's all moving in the same direction, you avoid conflict, you get the job done, and everything just happens quicker. Is that about right?
Yeah, I would agree. And I think the other person I would mention is a Japanese chap called Taiichi Ono, who's really the father of manufacturing and production lines. And you can also get him on YouTube, and he's black and white. He's passed away some time ago, but he described, he covered a whole raft of stuff, which I will not go into now, but I think perhaps the bit that's of most interest is he used to describe a river flowing. You can imagine it on a fairly level plain, so that the water would be flowing along. But what stops the flow is rocks. And what he talked about is, to improve the flow, you take the rocks out of the river. So you apply that approach to whatever it is you're trying to get flow into. And once the rock is removed, it's removed forever. But even organizations that go into their processes in great detail and actually map them and so on, they don't often get it right. And that's because they get a bit fixated on all the steps of the process, rather than standing back and looking at it end to end and thinking, so what's the outcome that we need to get, and who's the outcome for? What is it they want to see in terms of an outcome? It's really echoing back to what you were saying a few minutes ago. make sure that the recipient or even the victim of the process actually gets what they're supposed to get.
Yeah, and no names, no pack drill, which is our well-known phrase from the military days. Um, who can you think of, or what company that you've dealt with and worked with? As I say, no names, no pack drill, comes to mind when you show how they were before you started working with them and how they were after you started working with them, and what were the major factors that stopped the success, and after you'd taken them through the process made a big difference.
It was interesting. It was in one organisation, which was a multinational. I was working with them in Glasgow, and I worked in two areas. I worked in HR. They were putting in a shared service centre for HR, and I also looked at their learning and development process. So the two were quite different. In the HR shared service centre, some of the HR processes were mapped and others were not. And some of those that were mapped were kind of up to date, and others were clearly not up to date. So we embarked on a whole exercise of going through them all. The difficulty was that the process ownership was in the wrong place. So there was a process owner who was a manager who probably had two layers of people, the team leads and then people under the team leads, that sort of level of manager. And they were not actually the person who knew how the thing had to flow. Right. Because they were a manager. They wanted the outcome. So yes, of course, they were an important stakeholder and they had a say. But the people who know how to fix processes are the people doing it. And that's what Toyota do. Toyota are experts in this space. They really are. And they have the Toyota production system, which is totally documented on how that all happens. But the other one was quite interesting, was the learning development. So I was asked to take a look at these processes, and they'd been documented some time before. And when I got into them, there was an awful lot of them. I mean, and they did training for several programs, one of which they had a graduate program, they had other set programs. There were three or four that happened in the year. And the lady I was talking to about it said, well, they're all different. So she showed me the documentation and so on, and they had detailed procedures for these four different programs, but there was no picture of what a program looked like across the board, because actually they're not different. The only real difference in terms of what had to be done was whether there was an overnight stay involved. In other words, if it was a whole day with an overnight evening dinner or whatever, and then an overnight stay, you always somebody had to book hotel rooms and so on, accommodation for them. But it was only when I showed it to the team lead, and I said, look, I'll draft you a generic program that will fit all of these programs. You don't need, 8 variants of these, because they're basically the same. And it's really just an extended course.
And while you were explaining that, actually, I was going back, because we're talking and we're linking sport and how the nuance and how they come together. And I remember when I was doing my marathon training, and I was working hard because my target was to get sub 3 hours, and the process I had to do was, as soon as I put my trainers on and my shorts or jogging bottoms and shirt, that was part of the process. And then I was training, and then I was doing half marathons, 5Ks, 10Ks, half marathons. Then I was doing the 18 miles. And back then, and I'm not still sure how many actual marathons you need to do before a marathon, because if you can do 18 miles, 20 miles, then the last 6 come from in here, really. Because if you can do 20, you can do 26. And it was in the zone totally. And I remember the marathons that I did do, when I was on that start line, that everything just come into place from what I'd done beforehand to get me to where I was then, if that makes sense. And I think that's what you're saying in business, isn't it?
Yes, I think the other point you highlighted there, which is important, is preparation. Sometimes you actually need to think about what you're going to need for the process before you embark off on it. In your case, it was for marathon training. But I did a training course once where we were being taught in a specific process documentation method, which was very thorough indeed. and we were all asked to knock out a process for, I think it was redesigning a garden or something like that. It was some domestic gardening
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
My process started was checking and laying out all the tools I were going to need for the process. That was my first step. Nobody else had that.
Right.
It was quite
Okay.
interesting. They went straight into drawing a sketch of the new garden or whatever.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, that's interesting because when you said that, I remember when I did my field sergeant's course, because I was one of the only sergeants that went from the bomb disposal unit to the combat engineer field sergeants. That's because I'd served with the combat engineers beforehand, and we had to write a complete engineer report on how to build a big building. But that went into tools, personnel, rations, materials, everything before we actually got to the site to build it. And I think that's what you're saying. Well, listen, I think we should do a part 2 on this because and if you've got any comments, by the way, please make the comments because we can answer them at some point, or messages. Now, Neil, before you go, I'd just like to know. I'd like to know how people can get in touch with you.
Well, the best way to get a hold of me is on LinkedIn. You'll find me there. My name is as spelt on the screen there, and there's only one of me on LinkedIn, so I'm quite easy to find.
Yeah, so that's pretty easy. And at the minute, you're looking to help some business owners who want to get the ducks in a row. Which is, I'll have to describe where that came from actually. But you want them to get the ducks in a row.
Yes. We are. We're founding a friend of mine and I are founding a new company, and our model is a bit different. We hope it's going to be refreshing. We're harnessing the knowledge and skills of experts who have been around for a while.
Seasoned professionals.
Seasoned professionals. Good term. Yeah, good term. Yeah. And so we can really address many issues. There are a set of standard frustrations out there that leaders have because they're on their own, because they try things and they don't work, because they can't get people aligned with what they're trying to do, and so on. And there's more of them. These are common problems. And we can really, in a nutshell, we can do anything from go in to look at a particular problem, or we can provide a complete method that covers 6 areas. It's been proven in the States with 275,000 organizations have used this method that focuses on 6 specific areas. And it's a complete method to analyze and fix those 6 areas, and then set goals and targets, and then assess, implement, and repeat around those, and you're constantly looking at those 6 areas. So the very first thing is an overall assessment for the whole organization. It's all scored with numbers, and you should come out around 80%. That's a good place to start. If you're below that, that's your first target for the year, and you review that quarterly. And it even goes into it's very much a how-to approach, and it even includes how to hold meetings to actually move things forward in a very structured way.
Thank you. Well, Neil,
several more.
Yeah, Niall Ogilvy, seasoned professional, business guru. Thank you very much for your time, and we'll check in again maybe in a week's time. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Joe. It's been fun.
And right, to find out more, remember you can tune in and log on to joeteams.com. That's JOETEAMS.com to find out loads of resources like the Pathfinder and Mastermind and Beyond, and loads more, the Transformer Business Network. So until we meet again, and until the next time, have a brilliant day. Thank you.